Hey gang, this week's episode is brought to you by the Arizona Office of Tourism. This spring, follow your favorite baseball teams to Arizona for Cactus League spring training. Amazing weather and landscapes, exciting outdoor adventure, incredible food. Arizona is the perfect home base for baseball fans. Plan your spring training getaway at visitarizona.com/spring training. Yes, that's visitarizona.com/spring training. And now here's our show.
For the land of the free and the home of the flame.
They'll have this place rocking tonight. The referee, one of the senior officials of the National Hockey League, Mr. Wally Harris. The linesmen are Claude Bouchard and guard Brassiker. In goal for the New York Rangers, it'll be John Davidson, who was 13-5-1 in his last 19 regular season games. In the playoffs, a 1.99 goals against average against the Flames. And again tonight, it'll be Daniel Bouchard for Atlanta, 3.18 on the year, 14-6-4 lifetime against the Rangers until this playoff, 3.47 is his average as we get ready for game number 4. Flames in the white, defending the goal to our right, and the Rangers, of course, in the traditional blue with the red and white, defending the goal to the left.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
All right, let's do this, friends. How are you? This is Tim Hanlon. It's Good Seats Still Available, the curious little podcast devoted to, of course, what used to be in professional sports. Thank you for coming back. Or if it's the first time, welcome to the proceedings. We thank you for doing so. This week, we are, to the delight of hockey fans everywhere, back onto the rinks, shall we say. And we go back to, frankly, some teams that we've been dying to kind of at least scratch the surface on or above or upon, shall we say. And we have the exclusive and unique excuse to do so with on 3 of those teams. The Atlanta Flames, which you heard a little bit thereof in their time in Atlanta, the team that obviously moved to Calgary ultimately, and then after a number of years of bereftness, Atlanta then getting the Thrashers. And then them leaving, of course. So we get into that. We get into the Quebec Nordiques. Remember them in the NHL, them being a converted franchise from the old WHA. And also the Winnipeg Jets, the previous version of the Winnipeg Jets. Of course, the current version, the sort of second incarnation of such. But our excuse to get to all 3 of those teams for the first time on this little show is our special guest this week, Dan Bouchard, a very well-known and well-regarded goalie in the NHL during the 70s and 1980s. Across all 3 of those teams, the Flames of Atlanta, the Nordiques of Quebec, and the first incarnation of the Winnipeg Jets. That is the basis and the focus of our conversation this week. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of this conversation, or at least the beginnings of it, was in my mind, as I try to do, is try to keep things light, jovial and frankly anecdotal, because look, a lot of these stories, a lot of these histories, a lot of their little explorations, are somewhat comical, if you will, because these are leagues and teams and situations and people and that are just kind of hard to believe, and usually through sort of the the lens of history and looking back and stuff. There's a lot of sort of not only wistfulness, but also a little bit of humor and a little bit of comedy and incredulousness, frankly, about, sort of the things that happened and the people behind them and the things that they were thinking at the time. And we get a little bit of that with Dan in our conversation. But this is also, as you will see as we get into it, a story that's much deeper and a little bit, frankly, more serious with some repercussions that have still, frankly, yet to play out. But, certainly affected the career of Dan. And frankly, others in the National Hockey League. In particular, we get into some of the reasons, and frankly, not very well-known reasons as to why the Flames actually wound up leaving Atlanta when they did in 1980 to go to Calgary. I think a lot of people generally sort of assume and were under the impression that the Flames ownership under Tom Cousins, was having a tough go of it. Obviously, the team was not making a lot of money, if any. Certainly wasn't a solid presence in the Atlanta sports landscape. And again, some of that's a scene of the 70s and the 80s, early 80s, and the NHL at the time, but also Atlanta as a hockey market. We get into some of that. But frankly, Tom Cousins wasn't doing so well himself in the real estate business and that kind of thing. And I think a lot of people just generally assumed, or at least the narrative that's was conveniently sort of thrown out there was that Cousins' business interests not doing well, not adding to, frankly, the benefit of the Flames franchise. And it just sort of became a sort of a storm of impossibility to keep the franchise in Atlanta, hence the move and continuation of the franchise elsewhere in the city of Calgary. But as we get into our conversation with Dan, some other sort of perspectives on that, in which Dan was in particular part of the mix. Not obvious at the time, but you hockey historians out there will know a guy by the name of Alan Eagleson and his controversial status as the first executive director of the NHL Players Association. And most of you in the hockey history firmament will know that he certainly went to jail and was kicked out of the Hockey Hall of Fame for various reasons relating to the topic that we're going to get a little deeper into with Dan, which is around NHL pensions at the time. And I encourage you to listen if you don't know sort of the full background of the story. This is not just a story of Dan Bouchard and his, frankly, tremendous statistics and great play as an NHL professional, mostly on those three teams, a couple of other places too. And again, our original excuse. But this is also a story intriguing in the sort of, I guess you could sort of say the management or the lack thereof around NHL player pensions and that kind of stuff. And you'll see why Dan was sort of part of that story that it took a while, frankly, to kind of get out. But we're going to get into some of the depth of all of that. And frankly, we'll probably give you a different sort of perspective as to maybe why the Flames left Atlanta, why Dan moved on as well to other franchises, and frankly, a bit of sort of maybe where the NHL has come from since those days. It's an intriguing conversation, one that was somewhat unexpected in terms of its depth and soberness, I guess you could say. But it's all entertaining, and we encourage you to give a listen in the next couple of moments with our conversation with the great and the amiable Dan Bouchard coming up in just a few moments. Please stay tuned; you will enjoy it, I assure you. If you want to remember, of course, the Atlanta Flames, or heck, even some of the earliest incarnations of the Winnipeg Jets and the Quebec Nordiques. Well, we got two places for you to check out, and there are two of our great sponsors, of course. We've got some promo codes for you, too, and it's a great way to celebrate the memories of these teams. And the first we want to share with you is our friends at oldschoolshirts.com out in Cincinnati. And that's, of course, oldschoolshirts.com. And you want to use the promo code GOODSEATS for 10% all of your purchases when you go there early and often. And there's a number of really cool looking Atlanta Flames t-shirts, a couple of different sort of creative takes. I think you'll enjoy both of them or all three of them. And there's a whole host of other stuff, too. All kinds of other sports and pop history and pop culture and all kinds of great things and memories in beautiful, well-crafted, and comfortable T-shirt form. There's new stuff just about every week. And the Flames of Atlanta are indeed just a mere scratching of surface of what's available for you in total, at oldschoolshirts.com. Again, oldschoolshirts.com. Use the promo code GOODSEATS for 10% off all of your purchases. We love our friends at Old School Shirts, and we encourage you to try them out and wear them proudly, why don't you? And then once you're done there, why don't you hop on over to our friends at 503 Sports? And of course, 503-sports.com. That's the website. Don't forget the dash. And we've got a promo code there for you, too, for 10% off all of your purchases. That's the promo code SEATS. You don't need to use the word good in there. Just throw in the word SEATS, S-E-A-T-S, and you will get 10% off all of your purchases there. And not only will you find some Atlanta Flames and Quebec Nordiques and I think original Winnipeg Jets T-shirts, but at 503 Sports, that is 503-sports.com, promo code SEATS, you will also find uniquely handcrafted, custom-made jerseys that will allow you to impress all of your friends. If you want to remember, for example, the Atlanta Flames in all of their glory, they got a couple of caps and T-shirts and stuff, but there is a smart-looking, painstakingly recreated Atlanta Flames jersey that will make you the envy of all of your friends, either walking down Peachtree Road or at the Hartsfield International Airport, or frankly, wherever you're going representing the great city of Atlanta. The Atlanta Flames jersey, uniquely and exclusively at 503 Sports. Again, 503-sports.com. Be sure to use your promo code of SEATS for 10% off all of your purchases, including that jersey. If you buy that jersey, that's going to be a hefty savings for sure. And, of course, with great appreciation, thank our friends at 503 Sports out there in beautiful Portland, Oregon, and our pal Dustin Alameda and his friends out there that put that great set. Again, 503-sports.com, promo code SEATS. All right, let's move on and into a revealing conversation with goalie extraordinaire from the National Hockey League of yore. His name is Dan Bouchard. We hope you enjoyed this conversation, and here it comes. This little show that we've done for the last 2.5+ years has been sort of focused on teams and leagues, and no longer with us for whatever reasons. And you know, aside from your stellar hockey career, it seems like you almost specialized in teams that went away after some point. And I'm curious as to sort of some of those stories that you might remember, for better or for worse, around those. In particular, of course, you know, the Atlanta Flames, and which tends to be kind of a blind spot for a lot of people in the NHL. But if you don't mind, before we get to that, I'm just really curious if you can help our audience get a sense of how you got into the hockey thing altogether. Like, when did you know, when you were growing up, that you had the chops to go for it in the pros?
Well, it happened very fast. You know, my father played pro hockey. He was a Montreal Canadian first-round pick when they were able to take the first French Canadian. That happened post-World War, after the Second World War. Canadian would take, had always choice of a free choice on the first French Canadian player in the province of Quebec. They could always have him for free. And that was something that was set up with the league. My dad ended up playing in 1947 in the U.S. Hockey League, in Dallas against, they used to play against the Detroit farm team and Chicago farm team. And anyway, he ended up not finishing his career. He played for 3 years in pro hockey. Then he ended up going back to Canada to play in the senior hockey league there in Quebec, in Northern Quebec, Northern Ontario League. And he ended up playing hockey and baseball, and kind of lived his typeful life. And I was born in 1950. And in 1961-62, I went to a Pee Wee tournament in Quebec, and had a lot of success, you know. And when I came back, he asked me, "Well, did you like it?" Oh, I says, "I think I'm going to become a hockey player." So he says, "Well, look, next year you're going to go back. Let's see how you do." So the next year I went back, and I ended up being the starter. They won the game. I had like 60 shots, and only gave up a goal. And when I came back, I told him, it was fabulous. There was 11,000 people, and it was great, And I says, I know I'm going to be a hockey player. So he says, we'll make sure. So then he made me write my dreams. That Sunday we went to church, and after church he gave me hockey cards, and he gave me 3 goalies. He gave me Glenn Hall, Jacques Pont, and Perry Sawchuk. And he says, these are the guys you got to copy. You got to mimic somebody. You got to study these guys, and you got to follow how they live their lives, and why they're successful and why they're there. And so I got all kinds of books, started to read about him. And then that summer he sat me down again, and he asked me, he says, now you're 12 years old. You're going to have to start to play junior hockey when you're about 15, 16. You're going to have to leave home. You got to be able to write everything down. So he made me write everything down. Then he says, normally is the way it is right now. He says, with the new 12 team in the NHL, he says, you should be drafted in 1969. So he says, you're going to have to that year as a draft year, and he says, you got to get ready to write down your goals, what you're going to be, your skills, what it's going to be. And so he made me write down everything, and he called it my map for life, for my life. So that's how I became a hockey player. I had he was like a little bit ahead of his time. You know, a lot of people get paid to do things like that, but I was a kid who listened to his dad, and it paid off.
Well, what a gift, right? I mean, and probably in retrospect, too, right?
Indirectly, it was a gift, and it was indirectly, I saw a man. He would see me playing junior hockey, and then when I started to play pro hockey, you know, he saw me play, and he was very. You could see that he was happy for me, but indirectly, he could see himself having done just as much as me. You know, he was just stifled because at one time he was given an ultimatum by my mom, you know, to whether it's going to be the family or, you know, you can play pro sport. And he took the family. So that was a stifle man. He lived it all his life. And indirectly, when I started to play in the NHL, well, I was able to let him in and let him be part of it. And that was the good side of it.
Yeah. And that's, I'm sure he probably, you know, given your lineage and your exposure to sports and he's probably a wistfulness, right? Obviously to see his son succeed at the highest levels, but yet also sort of, I guess, you know, recognize that, you know, the proverbial I could have been a contender himself, right?
Yeah, exactly. But, you know, he told me when I left my first year I left for junior, I was 15 years old. I was moving to a place called Shawinigan, Quebec. He said to me, I'm going to tell you the 11th commandment. Don't BS yourself. And, you know, when you're 15, you wonder, what is he saying? And he was saying, there's only one person you cannot lie to, is to you. He says, you got a dream, you got a map. He says, if what your map should tell you how you're going to make a decision. And I think that was the best advice I could ever have. For
sure. Why goalie? And when did you decide like a goalie was the position?
Well, I was 7 years old, and I was playing for in the neighborhood in Montreal called La Salle, and I was playing for a small parish. You know, we had the parochial school, and we had parish, and we had a league hockey team there. And Jacques Lemaire's father was my coach.
Wow.
I was 7 years old. Jacques Lemaire was playing then for the Lachine Maroons, Lachine's Maroons in the Metro League in Montreal. And his dad was my coach. And his brother was playing hockey with me also. And we played one game. We started when I was 7. And we were playing a game. And one day we're playing a game, and all of a sudden no goalie. Because it was too cold, and the goalie, I always remember his name. His name was Michel Theroux. Well, Michel Theroux didn't show up. And he says, we don't have a goalie. I said, oh, yes, we do. Like in the jiffy, I was dressed. And I played goal that game, and, you know, everything went very well. And the next game, Michel Theroux found out that I played goal, so he showed up and said, I want to be a defenseman. So I became a goalie, and also I had an uncle that was a goalie. So, you know, I had a precedent to follow. So it was a lot of fun for me.
So junior hockey was your path then, right? So how did the pros come about? It seemed like you were...
Well, junior hockey was my path, but you see, I was living in Montreal, and there was the Forum, Montreal Forum, who owned the Metro League. They kind of had a monopoly on everything. They had a monopoly on all the midget hockey players. They had the monopoly on all the bantam hockey players. When you hit 14, if you were any good, they tried to sign you to C-Form.
You're sort of like in a syndicate almost, right?
Well, if you signed in the C-Form in the Montreal Forum, you know, system, you belong to them. Just like in Toronto, it was the same thing. You signed a C-form with Toronto Maple Leafs. Well, you belong to them if you were in the Toronto area. See, that's why those teams in those days had big monopoly. And that's why the U.S. team was not always as strong as the Canadian team, because they didn't have as much hockey players. And so they had to go in Canada, and that scouts would be willing to sign guys to C-form. And that stopped in 1968. That's how it was controlled. It was monopoly. And when I was 15 years old, there's a guy called Cliff Fletcher who came to my house with another guy to sign me. And his name was Caron, Doc Caron. It was with Montreal Canadiens. And he came to my house and he told my dad and told me, he says, if you don't sign the C-form, he says, you can't play in Montreal Island. We're going to blacklist you and all that. And my dad literally threw him out in the yard, in the front lawn. And I was 14 when that happened.
Well, so you clearly, though, at that point knew that you had some talent where people were fighting over you. So that had to be a good sign for you, right?
Well, that was a good sign. So there's a guy called Chuck Cato who worked with Boston. And he knew everything about me since I was 12 years old, about my TV tournament, about my bantam year. When I was 13, I was playing with the 14 and 15, and I was dominating. And there was another goalie playing in the same league as me, Phil Myre, who ended up in Niagara Falls, who was signed by the Montreal Canadiens as he was the last guy in the Montreal Forum could sign as a French Canadian. Well, I was playing against him, and I was just playing just as good as he was. So he asked me to go to a training camp with Boston Farm System, Quebec League. That was called the Quebec Junior A League. I went there my first year in Shawinigan. I did a year and a half there. And then I was traded to Sorel, which was indirectly the St. Catharines Chicago Farm System. And then I ended up in the OHA, and then I ended up getting drafted. My last year out of London, I would play with Siddler and a whole bunch of guys. I ended up getting drafted by Boston. I was Boston 5th pick in the second round. They had 5 picks in the first 2 rounds, and I signed with Boston.
So in the late 60s, early 70s, you're in the if you will, the farm systems of a number of NHL franchises, obviously not getting your look really until the Bruins give you kind of a look near the end of the 71 season, right? Or 70.
Well, no, that's not right, because in 67, 68, and I played in Sorel, and we played for the Canadian Championship, the Memorial Cup, and we played against a junior Canadian. And in that series, they had to hire the Montreal Canadian. It was 1-1 after 2 games in the Forum. And in those days, the Forum, the junior Canadian used to pack more people than some of the NHL team. So I ended up playing there. It was 1-1, and then after game 2, they went to get Montreal Junior Canadian were allowed to get a player from their league, a goalie from their league. They went to get Jim Rutherford, and we lost every other game in the playoff. In the 3 of 5, we lost 3-2, and Rutherford was the other goalie. So, and then after that, I jumped leagues. I went to the OHL because I need to be in the English league, and I ended up playing for London. And out of London, Boston Bruins just had the training camp in London. And the last game of the training camp every year, they used to play against the London Knights. And that night, we played the Boston Bruins. It was 1-1, and they scored with 2 seconds left in the game to make it 2-1. And they had something like 50 shots, and that's when Boston decided to draft me the next year.
Got it.
Sometime every game counts.
Yeah, right. No doubt. You never know when your best performance is going to be in front of somebody who can make a difference, right? So that meant, another, I guess, 2 years or so of minor league AHL
Yeah,
hockey,
with
right?
Boston. I played AHL. My first year, I played in Hershey with the Bears. And the second year, I played with the Braves. We had a team, an AHL team in Boston with the Braves.
So you're thinking at some point you're going to get that call up with the Bruins, right? And
Well, I'm practicing with the Bruins. I'm in Boston, the same building, and when Cheevers and Johnsons are not practicing, I'm practicing with them.
but something very interesting and very career turning happens in the interim, right? And that's this expansion, year 4 or so of this NHL expansion, which began in earnest in '67. And two teams the coming season of 70 for a start in 1972-73 are Atlanta and the New York Islanders. But also at the same time, and this is the part we'll get to your story of how you got to the Flames in a second. But this is also the same time, and we've had a lot of conversations about this. The World Hockey Association. Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
sir.
So where were you in the midst of all of that? Because obviously you're part of the Bruins sort of system. I got to think you got to look at the WHA too for your own benefit, no?
I was drafted by the New England Whalers. The New England Whalers became the Houston Astros eventually.
Arrows, yes. Houston
It
Arrows.
was
Yes.
Kelly, the guy Kelly that was in charge of Jack Kelly was in charge of the New England Whaler team, and he had drafted me. And I wanted to play. The fact, I was in the Boston Bruins system, and I knew that what's his name, Cheevers, was going to go to Cleveland. So I'm sitting at the NHL draft, expansion draft, and I know that I can go either with New England or become one of the goalies for Boston Bruins. But the Bruins call me, the morning of the expansion draft, and they say that they were not going to protect me. And they say, you're probably going to leave, in the draft for sure. So Billy Smith and I were taking in the expansion draft. Jerry Desjardins, Phil Myre was taken, and then Billy Smith and myself I ended up in Atlanta, Billy Smith with the Islanders.
All right. So how did you feel about not being quote unquote protected? Did it matter to you that arguably because this would be your quicker path to get to the NHL finally, or were you kind of a little bruised, I guess, because they didn't protect?
No, it was not. It's you can't get stuck there. You got a career, you got a map, you got to decide. So, I sat there and I said, well, that's great. I'm gonna see who drafts me. Then I found out I was drafted by Atlanta, and I said, hey, I'll sign for 1 year and we'll see how it goes. If they don't treat you well, all the teams in the World Hockey were allowed to try to take you. You had no more rights after your first year if you didn't sign with the team in the World Hockey. Why
did you decide to go the expansion route to Atlanta versus going the New England route with the WHA?
Well, in Atlanta had, for an expansion team, they didn't have a bad team. The question mark was always if the goaltending was going to do the job or not, because, there'd be some lopsided, games. So anyway, I got drafted. Plus Fletcher, who the guy, my dad kicked out out in the yard when I was 15 years old. Well, he was my GM.
You're kidding. He was the general manager? That's
why I mentioned that.
Talk about karma. I'm sorry. I'm only just picking all this up now. What a circle of karma that is.
Well, and the circle of events keep going throughout my career. The circle of events there is just like bang, 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 because then I'm going to sign with Atlanta. Then Alan Eagleson becomes my agent. Alan Eagleson was also the president of the Player Association, but he was also an agent. And all the guys that were the rep for each NHL team, he represented that player. Kind of had a monopoly there. He kind of had a hold on that. So before I signed my first contract with the Atlanta Flames, I always remember going into the office in Atlanta here, and Cliff Fletcher says, well, we're going to have a tough, the beginning of the season's going to be tough. We're going to play our first 12 games on the road because they knew the building was not going to be ready. So we had to play our first 12 games on the road.
This is something we hear a lot. This sounds very WHA-like, but we also found out this week, our episode this week is about the Kansas City Scouts who had to do the same thing with Kemper Arena.
They did. Exactly. You're right on. You got a great memory, great history there. And so he turned around and I says, yeah. So he says, here, sign the contract. So he gives me the contract, give me the pen. He says, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm reading the contract. He says, just sign there on the line. I says, no. I says, my grandpa told me the big letter, give it, the small, take it away. And he looked at me and he says, just sign it. Eagleson says that's what I agree with. You agree with me. So I says, wait a minute, Cliff. And I'm reading it and I said, Cliff, there's a mistake in this contract. I told the Eagle, I says, I'm calling Eagleson. I told Eagleson I was only signed for 1 year because I want to see how it goes this year, how you guys want to treat me. Because I knew that they had already signed Phil Myre for 3 years. So I said, well, wait, I'm signed for 1 year and that's it. And, he looked at me and he says, wait a minute, we'll get Eagleson on the phone and get Eagleson on the phone. And then the secretary, Ann White, that also followed the team's Calgary, Ann White was in the room there and Eagleson says, you blinkety-blink frog, like a frog, what's a frog? So,
yeah.
You know what? It's a French Canadian. It's like the N word in
it's a derogatory, of course.
And he says, you just put your name, you just signed that contract and screw off. And I says, Eagle, you misrepresented me. I'm going to sign this contract for 1 year. Don't you send me a bill? I'm going to sue you for malpractice. Then he says, you blinkety-blink fraud. That's going to be the only year you play in this league, and I'll make sure of that and all that. So Ann White is listening to everything and all that. So I says, point well taken there, Alan. I says, I won't forget that. So I signed for 1 year, and that year we almost made the playoffs.
You were drafted very high in that expansion draft, but you were so. Explain to me the other goalkeeper in all of this mix, right? Because
Phil Myre, he was Montreal Canadian. He was with Montreal Canadian. He was supposed to be number one. Yeah, interesting to me that two very solid goalkeeper prospects, right, and or play would be. Did you sense that one was being favored over the other? Did you sense that one was going to win the job? Well, it was set up that Phil Myre was going to be number one and I was going to be the backup. But I had another idea, because my father told me, look, you just roll with the punches. You go out there, you practice, you're a goalie. And he says, after a while, he says, you play with expansion teams, they think it's going to happen funny. They're going to have to play you, and you're going to play good games because you're always going to reap what you sow. And so I ended up not playing the first 4 games, and I played the 5th game. I lost 4-1 here in Atlanta against Minnesota, and then I played 2 games later in New York against the Rangers, and we won 2-1. They had 51 shots. We had 9 shots. And so things like that. That was the season. And by the end of the season, I played 34 games, and Phil's played, I think he's played 4 more games. He played 38 games. And I'm shooting 500 in my. I got in my 32 games. I got something like 42 points. So I'm sorry. I was kind of, if you put my batting average, my performance was 625.
So it essentially became a platoon thing where you were both kind of equals.
Well, that was what they say. The hockey team was the building blocks of the hockey team was the 2 goalies. So that's what happened. Here in Atlanta, the 2 goalies, night in, night out, the 2 goalies, Phil Myre and I, we kind of carried the team. we finished with 74 points, I think, that season. And no expansion team has ever done that.
Yeah, typical of expansion teams, right? Where the goalies basically become the bedrocks and you grow it from there. But even
just like Fleury did in Vegas. They rode the wave the first 2 months. They rode the wave, and look what they ended up.
Well, so explain to me the Flames, because they were, to your point, I think they kind of outperformed, at least on the ice, everyone's expectations of what an expansion team should be, right?
On the ice and in the stands, because when the Flames were shipped to Calgary, okay, indirectly I'm responsible for that. But when they moved the team from Atlanta to Calgary, the Flames were paying the payroll for the Hawks, the basketball team, and the Flames team. Okay.
Explain that to me, because there was joint ownership there, and we'll probably get into that.
Yeah, there was a joint ownership, but Tom Cousin owned the team, and he had 3 other partners, and they also owned the Hawks, the basketball team, and he was using the pro teams to put Atlanta on the map as a city in the South.
Right, and for our audience, this is obviously before Ted Turner comes into the picture later in the decade for it all that stuff. Right? Yeah. But yeah, this fits the theme of cities looking for pro sports franchises to get them into, if you will, major league status. And Atlanta, from the indoor perspective,
exactly,
all that. Yeah,
you're right on. So Atlanta, that's how Atlanta got. They had the football team, so they ended up. They had the Braves. Now they had hockey and they had basketball. So they were a major league city. And Tom Cousin, I went to the All-Star game. I had a baseball agent. My agent, after my first agent, was a guy called Jerry Capstein. He was the first guy to get collusion with Gene Tennis against Oakland A's and Charlie O'Finley. And Jerry Capstein, every year of the All-Star game, he had an average 24 to 30 players at the All-Star game in both leagues. He had about 30 players. They were all the All-Stars. And that year I went to All-Star game. I was at Pittsburgh in 79. And the guys from Raleigh Finger and another guy asked me to go, a guy called Rich Zisk asked me to go to the Major League Baseball Players Association meetings, the players meeting, NHL, the Major League Baseball PA. I went to it, and they start to talk about the pension plan. And, I came out of that meeting, and then Gene Dennis asked me, he says, Raleigh Finger says, Danny, you look very confused. I said, yeah, I'm confused. I said, I know you guys got a few more teams, but I said, what you guys, each team put for you guys in your pension plans the same as we do. And I said, we, the players, do a 50% match or 100% match. But I said, at age 45, I said, the Rocket Richard, Maurice Richard, Henry Richard, John Beliveau, Boom Boom Jeffrey on at 45, they only get $9,000 a year pension, and you guys get 42 to 45. I said, there's something wrong with the numbers.
Why were they interested in your pension thing? How did they know all of that? And you guys didn't?
Well, they did not know. I'm the one that knew what I was paying, and I understand the numbers. And if I do the quick math, I knew that, well, look, they only had 2 more teams than we did, more than but we were matching what they were matching. So they said, well, talk to so-and-so. He's going. I says, I want the algorithm of everything. And I said, the math, that the actuaries use for figure out the pension. So the guy comes over to me and explains it to me. And I said, no, just show me the algorithm. So I understand that. I said, that's not Chinese. It's numbers. I understand numbers. I says, so why? Well, he says, the owners are keeping the money. So I went back home after the All-Star game, and I started to write stuff down. I started to plan some stuff down. I met a guy that was an actuary, and I asked him, look, I got this. And I said, from what I'm getting, I says, it looks like the the league has stolen $77 million from the Player Association since 1962. So he says, he looks at me and he says, with this algorithm in the books, he says, you're right. So I called Tom Cousin. I said, Mr. Cousin, I got to meet you. I said, I got to ask you something. I said, there's something wrong somewhere with the pension player. I said, there's money missing. So I met him at a golf course called Peachtree, a very exclusive place here in Atlanta. So he says, Bouchard, I'll meet you and I'll bring Jack Carter. He's the guy that started Equifax. I says, okay. So I sat down. I gave him so he had Jack Carter ask me, what do you understand about the numbers? I said, I want this algorithm. I said, these are the numbers. That's how much money we pay. I could show you my check, how much money came out for my pension last year, this and that. So he says, if these numbers are right, he says, let me do something. But he says, in Canada, they got socialized medicine. He says, it's going to vary. There may be more money than you think. So 2 weeks later, he meets with me. And he says to me, Mr. Cousin calls me and he says, we got to meet. I got good news and bad news. Peachtree, 12:30. So I met him at Peachtree, 12:30 with Jack Carter and another guy called Tim Ecclestone. So Tim Ecclestone's not aware of what I'm doing, and he's going to be the assistant coach next year. He used to be the player rep for Eagleson. So we sit there, and Jack Carter says, well, Dan, you made a mistake. He says, so Mr. Cousin sits me down, and he says, Dan, look, the good news is you're right. The bad news is that the owners are stealing from the players. And he says, the players are the engine of the team. And he says, look, I gave you a Bible the first year you were here in Atlanta. And he says, I'm not going to steal from the players, from nobody. So he says, I'm going to have to bring that to the meeting. And Tim Nicholson is looking at me. He says, what are you talking about? I says, all the guys in Canada, their pension getting about $5,000-$7,000 a year for rocket Richard and all that. I says, well, they should be getting about $40,000 a year. I says, they're embezzling the money. So Jack Carter says, it's not $77 million the problem, it's $88 million. In 1979, what interest rate was? 18.5.
It's a lot of money.
So he says to me, are you going to run with that? I says, no, I got a contract. I'm going to honor my contract. I'm not going to bring that in nobody's life. So Tim Ecclestone's looking at me and he says, Dan, you do this, you're going to, he says, you're going to get, blackballed, you're going to blacklisted. He says, people in the league, nobody's going to want you to play for them. I says, there's another league, Tim. The World Hockey was still active. As a matter of fact, in 79, the World Hockey came on. So I didn't say anything, and I kept all the numbers with me. So Tom Cousin went at the Breakers meeting that year in December, and he told the owners that money's going to have to be returned to the players' fund.
Cousins, the owner of the Flames, is kind of, I want to say doing your bidding, but he's kind of standing up amongst the other owners as the first one to voice
the head honcho. He's the head honcho. He's the head guy.
He's doing the right thing, so to speak.
Oh yeah. And all the other owners knew they didn't want to be part of that. So when he approached the owners in New York, in Florida, and all, he told the guy in New York and Wirtz in Chicago and the Adams in Detroit, and he told everybody that they were stealing from he says, you can't do that. Where the team was the next year. It wasn't Calgary.
Because they, essentially squeezed out Cousins because of his vocalizations of all this?
Oh, yeah. Well, they did not want that to come out.
All right, what's this? The Arizona Office of Tourism Spring Training. Oh, my God. Hey, this spring, follow your favorite baseball teams to Arizona for Cactus League Spring Training. Amazing weather and landscapes, exciting outdoor adventure, incredible food, Arizona. It's the perfect home base for baseball fans. Follow your favorite baseball teams to Arizona for Cactus League spring training. 10 stadiums, 15 Major League Baseball teams, and 75-degree temperatures. Awesome. And all 10 stadiums are in the greater Phoenix area, all within 50 miles of the city. Meet players, get autographs before the games, and just enjoy an old-fashioned ballpark experience in beautiful preseason weather down in Arizona. Check out amazing restaurants and bars nearby, including tons of craft breweries like Four Peaks, Angel's Trumpet Ale House, and Goldwater Brewing Company. Enjoy live music from local and national artists, and explore museums featuring everything from native heritage to modern art to musical instruments from around the world and more. Arizona is known for its incredible landscapes too, as well as thrilling outdoor adventures. So hit the road and explore Arizona's urban centers or ghost towns or artsy communities or quirky outposts. You can hike, you can bike, you can take Jeep tours, hot air balloon rides, skydiving, jet skiing, or just taking in a good old-fashioned sunset. No matter what you love to do, Arizona has you covered. Check out must-see destinations from your bucket list like the Grand Canyon, Monument Valley, Horseshoe Bend, and even the great Old West city of Tucson. Bringing the kids along for spring training? Hey, Arizona's a fantastic destination for families too. Family-friendly resorts and hotels offer plenty of fun for kids of all ages, from water parks to horseback rides to games and activities. Arizona also has tons of stuff for kids to do and see, like wildlife parks and science museums, aquariums, and even dude ranches. So what are you waiting for? Plan now for your spring training getaway at visitarizona.com/spring training. That's visitarizona.com/spring training. Hey, and don't forget, send us a postcard. But the team had also had some struggles, right, financially as well. I guess that's...
No. There was no struggle. That was a fallacy of the things, because we were outdrawing, you call it, Quebec. I don't. They were in the World Hockey. They came to the league. They had small crowds. We were outdrawing Washington. We were outdrawing Denver. We were outdrawing Vancouver. We were outdrawing LA. I mean, we didn't have no problem with the crowds. We were averaging about 13.5 out of 14.99.
In a relatively new building with the Omni, right? Actually, a brand new building.
With the Omni, yeah. The Omni was a very nice building compared to a lot of the rinks around the league. But the whole idea was they were outdrawing everybody. But the issue that they said, well, we'll put the team in Calgary, because I remember leaving Atlanta, going to Calgary and playing that barn, the corral. I mean, that was kind of a joke. That was a step down. We were in the Canadian city, but there was only 6,400 people at the game.
So, okay, but there were efforts to buy tickets and distribute them to the. It didn't seem like it was. Maybe at the gate, yeah, but it seems like that it was, there were some hints of financial instability during those years, or were you just unaware of it?
No, the economy was bad because of it was 18%. No, the inflation, there was, the mortgage rates were 18%, and all that was a problem. And you know what? Cousins got $20 million for his team net, and the $4 million that he still owed on the $6 million franchise, he never had to pay it.
So it became a convenient way to rid the league, the league to rid them of the sort of the rebel rouser, right? And also absolve of the. Well, all right. Before we get it to Calgary and that stuff, so that's a very interesting. I guess, did you ever determine like why and how this pension money situation started in the first place? I mean, was there any? Did it ever get rectified and or corrected?
Well, nobody ever talked about it. Like Cousin says, you woke up the dead. You're bringing something, and he says if you start to talk about it now, you're going to end up in trouble. Your career could be jeopardized and all that. So, I signed a 1-year contract my first year in Atlanta. Then there was the president of the team was Bill Putnam. Then he gave me an 8-year contract. The second year I was in Calgary, I got an 8-year contract, and nobody had ever heard of an 8-year contract. But Capstein had gotten me an 8-year contract, and the contract was ratcheting it from so much money to where I made the 8-year, I make $140,000. But he also was able to get me $250,000 of cash up front that was non-taxable, so I could get me a house, I can get me some investment. So it was a little bit ahead of a lot of people's time, you see. So I'm sitting on an 8-year contract. I'm not going to jeopardize my contract.
Yeah, you had some leverage. So okay. So tell me about the fans and the reception during those years, because
hockey was a white hockey. Look, I'm not a racist, but hockey was a white sport.
Yeah, well, still kind of is, sadly.
Yeah, but I know, but in Atlanta, the Flames were hit. The Flames outdrew the Hawks, and the Hawks were living off the Flames crowds. And anyway, it was so good. I never left.
Well, you guys were also among the expansion teams that kept rolling out in the 70s in the NHL. You guys stood out almost from the beginning as being not only decent but actually competitive.
Yeah, we always made the playoffs.
Right, but the knock against you guys always was right that the playoffs was always kind of your
playoff. You know what? One year we went to LA. We were playing LA at best of 3, and LA scored 2 goals, and I didn't even have we scored 2 goals. We scored a goal and a half, and we had less than half a goal a game in the 2 games. We lost the first game in LA, 1-0, and we came back, and it's 0-0 after 3 periods, and we lost in overtime, 1-0. We scored 0 goals. How you win the playoff? We scored 0 goal,
Yeah, so, you're defending from all those goals. You can't go up and suit up and score them yourself too. I mean,
and that was always the knock, on you can't play in the playoff. They can't play in the playoff. And when I left the Flames system and I went to Quebec and got in the playoff, well, that was a different story because we had guys that could score goals, and the goalie looks better in the playoffs.
All right. Well, so tell me the move to Calgary, because it was obviously short lived. But I'm Nelson Scalbania. That's an interesting story. But you already hinted at it, right? That what you had.
Well, I knew. Well, we're in Atlanta on the 7th, on the 3rd of July or 2nd of July. They announced the Flames moving to Calgary, something like that. And on the 10th of July. Scalbania and all these people, he had all the real estate people come and look at everybody's house and trying to buy everybody's house here so they can move them in other comparable houses in Calgary. So me and Willie Platt, we go to Calgary. And the day before I left Calgary, somebody knocked on my door, and the lady said, "I'm with A. LePage, and we would like to know if we can look at your house, see what you got." And I told him, "Look, I'm not going to sell a house whether I play in Calgary or not. This house stays here, so don't even look at it." And the lady looked at me and he said, "Oh, well, I says, "I don't care. It's none of your business what I have here." So they left, and Willie Platt calls me and says, "Bouch, did you get a call? Did they stop by your house?" I said, "That's none of their business." I says, "Well, that's how they're doing things, I guess." So I pick up the phone and I call the guy in Vancouver. He was in charge of Intrawest, a big, Whistler, ski hills and all that. He was a good friend of mine, and I asked him, I says, Mr. Ferris, he lived with us when I lived in Ottawa when I was 5 and 6 years old. Well, this guy was a boarder with my family, and he ended up being a big businessman in Vancouver. So I call him and I says, "Who's Nelson Scalvania? I'm going to Calgary." He says, "Look, I'll give you the book on him." And he gave me all the information. So I remember me and Willie going to Calgary, and we went to the corral. When we went to the corral, the rodeo just finished. And we walk in there, and wow, there was cow manure everywhere, and there was a mess. So anyway, and then we saw the small building from the Omni to the small building. So anyway, and then they started to show us houses, and the houses were the house I live. I'm still living in the same house. The house I had in Atlanta would have cost me $600,000 in Calgary. And, interest rates over there were 18% too. And $650,000 for a house that in Atlanta cost me $125,000. So I went to Calgary and I told Willie, I'm just going to rent. Willie said, I'm going to rent too, first year. So I went to Calgary, I rented a house, and, halfway around January, I went to see Cliff and I says, "Why don't you trade me?" "Oh, nobody wants you." So I challenged Cliff Fletcher. I says, "Look, if you say nobody wants me, I bet you I can trade myself in 2 phone calls. I'll call 2 teams." And he said to me, he says, "Oh, you think you're good. No, you think you're good." And I knew it'd be easy because David Poile wasn't there. David Poile had gone to scout in Finland. So he says, "You think you're good?" Then he says, "Okay, I'll give you 2 calls." So he tells the secretary, Anway, "Look, Dan's going to have 2 calls. He can only call 2 teams." He says he can trade him. Let's see how good he is. And the first team I called, I traded myself. It was Quebec.
And for our audience, this is important to know because it's about a year or 2 after the WHA had finally, a handful of franchises had gone into the NHL, right? So that leverage had sort of gone, but arguably you had 4 new teams in the NHL, and not all of them were up to the NHL's standard, so to speak. So yeah,
that's right.
Leverage, right?
But Quebec, out of 21 teams, they were number 21. And I look at the league stat that Monday morning when I went to see Cliff to ask him that, and I saw the league stat, and I went to see Ann White, and I says, Ann White has known me for 8 years, and she knew my wife, she knew my family, so she says, "Why are you calling the 21st?" She says, "The Rangers will take you overnight." I says, let's call there. I says, "Next year is free agency." I says, "I want to exploit it. I want some leverage." So she says, "They're 21st. I says, "Yeah, but they win 6-7 games out of the last 25 games real quick." I says, "They're right back in the picture." I says, "All they need is a goalie." So she says, "Okay, should we call Quebec?" And the guy in Quebec tells me he thought it was a joke. He called me back. Maurice Fillion says, "Oh, I can't take a chance. I thought that was a joke." "What are you doing, trading yourself?" I says, I challenged my general manager. I told him I can trade myself in 1 day. He says, "Well, what do you think?" Well, I says, "Look, you're going to have to give a good player. You're going to have to give a good player if you want a goalie." And at that time, I had gotten the player of the week 2 of the last 4 weeks. So I was on the upswing, was starting to play real good. So he says, "Well, Dan," he says, Jamie Eslop, he's a fan favorite." Well, I says, "You know what? You're not going to get chicken shit if you don't give, you got to give the chicken sometime." So he says, "Well," I says, "Okay." I says, "You guys are playing tonight." I says, "We're playing in Edmonton." So I says, "It's 8:00 here." I says, "You guys are in at 10:00. You're going on the ice to do your skate." So I said, "Do your skate and we can talk after." So right after I got out of the office, Ann White says, I said, "I'll be back in about an hour." So I go into the gym and I sat on the bike in the gym, and Pierre Paget was there, and he says to me, he says, "Wow, you're doing good, Danny." I says, If we win tonight in Edmonton and all that. So I said, yeah, well, things are going good. Things are going good. So all of a sudden, Al McNeil comes in, and Al McNeil comes over to me and looks at me and he says, who are you? I says, I'm the goalie, Dan Bouchard. Huh, you're the goalie, huh? He says, well, you're not playing tonight. That's why he was the reason why I wanted to get out of there. This guy was not there. So he says, you're not playing tonight. So I says, oh, no, it's Edmonton. He says, you're not playing. We'll play Rigsby. So Pat Riggin ended up going to play the game with the other guys. So anyway, that morning I stayed at the rink. You know, I did the practice. Then we used to get on the bus and then go to Edmonton, have a training meal, play the game at 8 o'clock. So I get into practice is finished. All the guys are gone. I'm still on the ice, and all the guys coming into the ice. Bouch, the bus leaves in 15 minutes. You're still on the ice. I said, oh, no, I'm not playing tonight. He says, you told me I'm not dressing. The guy says, what's going on? I says, I don't know. But I says, sometime I'll be the winner for it, you know, because all of a sudden, there we are. So, where's Phil? You know, I told him, I called him back at 10:30. I says, go ahead, offer Jamie Eslap. He worked with Al McNeil and Pierre Paget in the hockey school. And I says, they know him. He's very, very, very hard worker, great work ethics. I says, that's what they need here. So that night, 10 o'clock, Phil Young calls me and he says, Danny, you're a Nordique. I says, Maurice, you made the playoff. And the rest is history, you know. And then, you know, last year, this is how crazy times are. Last year, Glenn Sader came out with a book, and he had in the book that he tried to get me that year. And Calgary would not trade me to Edmonton.
This is to the Rangers?
No. Glenn Sader was a GM, was a coach, and, you know, Buckler was a GM in Edmonton.
Oh, in Edmonton, sorry.
And Glenn Sader says, I was trying to get you to come and play for us. He says, we would have really, really taken off with you the same way you taken off with the Nordiques. He says, Fletcher did not. He says, he's not for trade. He's not for trade. And, you know, you had been telling me that nobody wanted me. But anyway, that was beside the point. So that year, we finished the season. I got in Quebec. There were 28 games, and I played 26, and I was 24-1-1. We made the playoff, and we got eliminated by Philadelphia in best of 5 in 5 games in overtime.
It almost feels like you kind of almost had the same sense of almost like joining the expansion team in Atlanta, right? Where you knew
for me
that goalkeepers were going to matter, right? In terms of building up how to get to the next
level. You know what? That year, when I joined Quebec, you know, that year they had 3 guys that scored 50 goals. 4 guys that scored 50 goals. They had one of the Stastny. They had Jacques Richard, Buddy Cloutier, and Michel Goulet.
Sure.
Imagine that. They had 450 goal scorer. And when we were here in Atlanta, you know, we had 3 guys that had 50 goals. You know, Guy Chouinard had 50 goals, Bobby McMillan and Eric Vale had 50 goals here in Atlanta.
Well, plus you're also playing in Quebec, which is frankly just, you know, a stone's throw pretty much from where you spent your early years, right? So it kind of probably almost felt like coming home.
There was financially is dreadful.
Certainly.
Financially, it was dreadful because, you know, that 62% tax. You know, I had to, when I re-signed with them, I had to spend a lot of my times I had to have 180 days in the United States to be able just to file tax here in the United States to take advantage of my Canadian outpay. So it was, you know, I was kind of playing Donald Trump with the taxes there, but there was a way around it to where I could recoup about 12-15% of that money that I didn't leave on the table. So financially, it was not that great of a deal. But career-wise, it was excellent.
So tell me about Quebec, the Nordiques, obviously one of the smallest, if not the smallest market in the NHL at the time. The fans, obviously, it's a historically very deep and rich hockey culture, right? So that's certainly
You
something going for you.
You couldn't compare Quebec and Atlanta.
Yeah, so juxtapose that for me. Give me a sense of what the Atlanta cosmopolitan scene versus Quebec.
It was like somebody would go and play baseball in Milwaukee, and then he goes to play for the Yankees. And then you had the big rivalry with Montreal Canadiens. Every time Atlanta went to play in the Montreal Forum, it was a mecca. All the players seemed to be intimidated. It was the Forum. When the Nordiques went to play in the Forum, all the boys felt at home. They all grew up around Montreal. So you see, they were not intimidated by the building.
But the intensity of that rivalry was something else.
Well,
right?
it was, there was one brewery owned one team, one brewery owned the other team. You knew that. And the breweries were whining and dining all the newspaper guys when they were in their town, and when they were in the other town, they were whining and dining them in the other town the night before. And it was like, when we played the series in '82, when we eliminated them, well, they said that the water, the aqueduct in Montreal and in Quebec, in between periods, they could see the water go down because everybody went to the bathroom at the same time between first and second.
Yeah, how much did the NHL kind of? I mean, it's obviously a different era, right, back then. But the NHL today. I mean, if you imagine if you had that rivalry today, I mean, the NHL would make a marketing meal out of that, right? Because that intensity was.
Well, they would because you look at a team like Arizona. Look how they had nobody in the building for the longest time.
Yeah, or Florida.
And Florida. And look at the Panthers. They got nobody there. And, they could fill that. Look, with all the TV and all the stuff going on and the gambling, the betting, you see, what's happening in Quebec, it's that the Canadian teams don't want another team to go there, to Quebec. That's the real crux.
Now, why is that? Because I was going to get
because all the betting money, they got betting on the sports in Quebec, in Canada, legalized betting, and then there's all the TV rights and all that, and the company that wanted to get the team Videotron, well, they own the whole Eastern Canada. They're like Comcast Eastern Canada. And the Montreal Canadiens don't want to lose that market. You see, it's all dollars, all politics. Because the Nordiques, that new building that went in it several times is gorgeous. And they could make a team live there just as good as Vancouver the last 2-3 years, and nobody in there.
You were on the ice during the infamous Good Friday massacre. Do you want to
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk about that? Because I'm not sure. I want to use this for our listeners as evidence of just how intense this this rivalry was in the 80s between the Nordiques and the Canadiens. But this was this is something that is just infamous in league history as one of the more bitter on ice spats that ever happened.
And you know what? It was not just the fight itself. They had nothing to do with it. It's the way the league. You see the Montreal Forum and the NHL was in Montreal, and the way that the league stuck their nose in between the second and the third period, and not the referee take the decision, and the league took the decision and all that. That's what happened. They screwed up the whole game because it was a very, very innocent thing. Because the guy that got knocked out, Jean-Mel, when he got knocked out by Slager, these two guys played together in Quebec and they were roommates for 3 years. They were the best buddies. And what happened is Mario Tremblay tried to cheap shot Slager. And Slager avoided the check, saw him coming. So Slager turned around and was going to punch Mario Tremblay, who was a real instigator. And as he threw the punch, Jean Mel put his head trying to get in between the two, and he got completely knocked out. That's how, first of all, that's how it started. Jean Mel's trying to be, brawl breaker, gets knocked out, and then the bench cleared. And I remember I didn't fight because, look, it's 2-1 for us. Why should I fight?
This was during a playoff series. It was a Game 6.
Yeah, it was Game 5. It was Game 5 Game 5 of the best of 5.
And the second period was kind of winding down when sort of the first sort of altercation happened. But it seemed
exactly. There was only about a minute and 30 seconds left in the period. And that's when it happened. And we were winning 2-1. And Mario was trying to steam his team up. And he missed his check. And Slager was going to punch him. And the other guy jumped in and gets knocked out. And then the bench cleared. And the guys was trying to get me to fight, and I had 2 guys who were sent from the bench to make sure I didn't fight. Don't fight, stay there. But what happened is each team had 5 guys thrown out of the game. So, the vice president of the league came in our dressing room, and the chief referee says, you can't go back on the ice. Get undressed right now. We want to see you undressed right now. So, but they didn't do the same thing in Montreal Canadiens. So the 5 guys supposed to be suspended from Montreal Canadiens came back on the ice and started a fight with some of the other players on the ice, of which 2 more of the Nordics player got thrown out. The league never talk about it.
So are you hinting that maybe the league was kind of putting their thumb on the scale?
Well, of course, it was a form. Because a year after, we ended up going to play the Canadian. We ended up playing the Canadian, and we beat them in overtime, Game 7. And you know what? It was just like poetic justice, really. It was so. Anyway, it was just like, but that was always, Montreal. To go and play Montreal Forum was the Mecca, but with Scotty Bowman, he had the guy that was the help for the equipment, help our manager for our equipment. Well, he used to come in at night and measure all the sticks. Scotty Bowman had this guy could get in the dressing room and he'd go and measure all the sticks, and we figured him out. We had a guy that played for us at the Flames, Larry Romanchuk. And we used to tell him, put your 2 illegal sticks and we'll leave the other ones in the bag. And he had made a little mark on them. And so Doc, his name was Doc. And so Larry Romanchuk went on the ice. It's 2-1 for us. And Larry Romanchuk goes on the ice and they start to measure the stick. And, they could measure the stick how it was. He was a quarter of an inch under being oversized. So, Scotty Bowman saying, that stick is illegal. So I walked to the bench and I says, Scotty, we changed the stick. We know Doc measures the stick at night. I says, you got caught there, buddy. And Serge Savard was standing there and he was laughing. He was saying, no way. I says, yeah. So they ended up with the penalty and we scored in the empty net. And then, that went around the league, and then the league defended visiting their own team to be able to access dressing room, unless there was a personnel from that team in the room. That Montreal had all kinds of stuff going. So, they didn't win 25 times by accident.
So, but your last season though was 84-85 with Quebec, right? That was a period of time, those years that you were there. The Quebec was very much in the mix and arguably just short of sort of reaching sort of that next pinnacle of maybe winning.
Well, the only thing Quebec did not have, because one year we lost to the Islanders in 4 games, but we lost all games by a goal, and they had some of the games they won by 2 goals, but they were empty netters. And the only things that we did not have that the Islanders have is a Dennis Potvin.
Well, Dennis
Because in that series-
Potvin would be the difference maker for just about any team, wouldn't he?
Yeah. Well, if we would have had a guy like Dennis Potvin on the Northeast, where we would have won the Stanley Cup like Paul Coffey was in Edmonton. You see, that was the only thing. You see, the Nordiques never had a quarterback like a Larry Robinson or something like that. You see, because Potvin that series had 9 points out of 11 points in four games. They had 11 goals, and he had 9 points. And our best defense had 1 assist. What's that tell you?
Amazing. Well, all right. So explain to me then your last season with Quebec and going to Winnipeg. You obviously played about half the season.
That year I started the season. The 85-86 season. I go to training camp and I start to do training camp and things was going. And then, the coach Bergeron calls me in and he says, well, I would like you to, the third goalie, I want you to bring the kids up and all that and so on and this and that. And here I am, one of the best paid player on the team. And, he wants me, that's the job he wants me to do. So I said, sure. So I started the season and we play one game. We win one game. We lose one game. After that, we lose 3 games in a row. Well, he puts me in the goal for 2 games. We win 2 games and the team gets going again. And he would put the 2 other kids, which I didn't mind. I knew that you come towards the end of your career, somebody's going to start trying to push you. If it's not another goalie, it's going to be the management. And that year at around Canadian Thanksgiving, it was in October, around October 10th. It's usually the second Monday of November. Well, I got a call from the Nordiques and they told me I was traded to Winnipeg. So I left Winnipeg that day to go to Quebec that day to go to Winnipeg. And when I got to Winnipeg, do you remember that show on the radio? It was called "And Now the Rest of the Story"?
Sure, yeah, Paul Harvey.
You remember that? Well, that's the rest of the story. I ended up in Calgary, and guess who's picking me up? Not the trainer or one of the, guy that helps around with the team. It's John Ferguson. Fergie picks me up, and I'm at the airport, and I got my cart with all the stuff and all that, and I see Fergie, and I says, Fergie, you picking up your wife or something? I knew him from Montreal a little bit, so and he says, what are you talking? I'm picking you up. I says, the GM picks up the player. He says, just roll this outside. He said, we'll put that over there. Like the 2 cops are washing my car. We'll put that. He had the big Cadillac, so we put the stuff in there. And it was October, and it was like -4 below. So I said, oh wow, reality sets in already. So I get in the car, and I said, Fergie, what are you doing picking me up? He says, we're going for lunch. We're going for supper. He said, I got to talk to you about something. I says, you got to talk to me. I says, about what? He says, I got to talk to you about something. So I says, okay, well, you can talk. So we get a lunch at supper and nice steak place. And I says, Fergie, I never had that happen. Even in Quebec, when I went to Quebec, I never got treated like that. He says, I want the numbers. I says, what are you talking about? I says, I found out through somebody that you have all the numbers on the pension plan, the players, the money that's been stolen from the league, from the players in the league. I says, what are you talking about, Fergie? He says, Danny. He says, Tim Ecclestone told me you had the numbers. I says, yeah. And well, I says, I'm still playing. I'm not going to I'm not going to screw around with that and this and that, you know. And so he says, well, listen. He says, when do you want to talk about it? I says, you know what, towards the end of the season, let's talk about it. I said, first, what do you want me here for? He said, I want to make the playoffs. I said, okay, we'll make the playoffs. So we ended up playing the game, and then we had a guy, Barry Lawn, that was our coach, and Rick Bonus. And Barry Lawn wanted to get fired, and he didn't want to lose his contract, his 2-year contract. And so Rick Bonus calls me, and he says, you know, Barry says you're not going to play for the rest of the season. I said, hey, look, I'll go and cash my check every 2 weeks. And I says, that's the end of my career. It's the end of my career. So I says, I don't know why you're telling me that. It's none of my business. So we're 5 or 6 points out of the playoffs, and there's 10 games left. And Fergie comes to me one morning in practice, and he says, how's your ankle? He says, nothing wrong with my ankle. He says, what is this? He says, the trainer and Barry told me that you had a bad injury in your ankle. I said, I don't have an ankle. How can you skate for an hour and a half and have a bad ankle, Fergie? I says, that's not true. I says, Bones told me I'm not going to play. So I said, because, says, looks like Barry's trying to get fired. But I said, I don't blame the guy. If he resigns, he doesn't get his contract. He goes, oh, here we go. So the next day, we found out that Fergie fired Barry Lawn, and it's 10 games left. Fergie comes to me and he says, look, we got to make the playoffs. We make the playoffs. He says, I won't buy your last year of your contract. I says, Fergie, you cannot buy the last year of my contract. I says, I got 6 year and a 1 year option, and it's all guaranteed. I says, it's all signed by all the players in the league. I says, there was a collusion when I got to sign the new contract. I says, the same guy that got the collusion against the NHL is the same guy that got the first collusion against Major League Baseball. It's Capstein. He says, what are you talking about? I says, Fergie, you can't see my contract, even if you're a GM in Winnipeg. Shane Crow won't show it to you. He looks at me and says, no way. So he comes back the next day and he says, I can't see your contract. They told me nobody sees that contract. I says, I told you, Fergie. He says, what'd you do? Well, I says, I was a free agent and we got all the owners to sign to guarantee the contract. He says, really? All right. He says, you're in the lot. You're on the blacklist, you know. I've been on the blacklist since my first year I signed with Eagleson. So I said, that's the rest of the story, Fergie. He says, you had Eagleson? This is my first year, yeah. And I says, he tried to screw me, and I took a 2-year contract. And he says, you did that to Eagles? He says, yeah. No wonder he hates you with a passion. I says, yeah, that's okay. So he says, we ended up playing 7 games in a row. After the 7th game, we were in Washington. We went to 7 games in a row. We're guaranteed to make the playoff. We go in LA and Quebec, that night that we arrive in LA, we're going to play 2 nights later. Quebec is playing LA, and Quebec won their first championship. I was in the same building as Quebec was when they won the first championship. And indirectly, that made LA completely out of the playoffs. So we were sure in. So I'm at the game, and Fergie's at the game, and I'm in the press box, and Fergie comes over to me and he says, okay, now let's go and eat. Let's go in the Forum Club. So I go in the Forum Club, and there's a guy called Peter Falk. I don't know if you remember him. Colombo.
Oh my God, sure.
Peter Falk come over and he says, hey, Danny, how you doing? You know, he says, I hope you didn't forget me, you know, and all that. And Fergie smoked cigar all the time. So I asked Fergie, hey, Fergie, and you want to talk about the numbers? And I says, yeah. Says, come here. Fergie had 2 big cigars, 2 Cuban cigars in his pocket. I said, here, thank you. Here, Peter, You like the Cuban cigar? I says, here, John Ferguson's giving you one Cuban cigar. He said, hey, Danny. So I says, thank you, John. Thank you. So I says, okay, let's start business. So he says, Carl Brewer wants those numbers. And Colleen Gorial wants the numbers. He says, Rocket's only... I says, I know all that. But he says, look, I won't buy your contract. I says, you can't buy it. I told you. He says, I don't want to talk about it. He says, okay, we made the playoffs. I won't buy your contract. You're going to get paid the remaining years over 6 years. And he says, that's okay. That's fine with me. But he says, I want that stuff. Next year, we're playing Relive the Dream, the 1972 series against the Russian. He says, we're going to replay that. We're going to play one game in Ottawa, one game in Hamilton, one game in, not Calgary, but Saskatoon. And he says, one more game in Sudbury. And he says, I'm sorry, in Ottawa again. He says, you going to play all the games? So I says, okay. But he says, the first night in Ottawa, you're going to meet Carl Brewer and you're going to meet Colleen now and Gorial. Walk in the room at the Chateau Laurier in Ottawa, and Gorial was in the room. Colleen now was there. Carl Brewer was there. Me and Fergie would walk in the room. So Carl Brewer says, so you're the numbers man. He says, of all things, a goalie. So I said, yeah, I'm the numbers man. So I show him everything, and I explain everything. Look, it's very self-explanatory. Look, it works like this, like this. As you see, I got the actuaries putting all the numbers and what it is year per year, the increments, and the composed interest and everything. So I says, I says, numbers never lie. So they look at it, and so he says, how much money? I says, well, we should be around $168 million that they owe us. But I says, it's going to be a fight because a lot of the money is the money that they stolen from the Canadian social medical system. The U.S. owner was making money with the U.S. medical system. So I says, and that the other animal that's going to link in the litigation. But I says, look, minimum you should get easy $160 million. In 1991, we settled for $144 million because Carl Brewer was dying of cancer, but that night when I opened the door to get out of the Chateau Laurier to go and eat with the rest of the players, guess who was at the door waiting for me? Alan Eagleson, Tom Cannon, and his other buddy. And they all look at me and they says, we're going to get you thrown in jail for defamation. And I look at them and I says, Mike Cannon, and I told the other guy, I says, if I was you, I'd get out of town real quick. Because I says, Alan Eagleson's going to wear a striped pajama. You're going to wear a striped pajama. Those numbers that I gave them, they don't lie. It's printed in stone. Numbers are always printed in stone. I said, you guys are going to jail. The other guy was Sam Simpson. And they all look at me and they say, so Eagleson says, I'm going to have you. You're going to be in jail no time, Bouchard. No, I says, look, Eagle, you crossed me my first year. I says, it's funny how the roads cross again. But I says, I'm the top prong on the cross. And the rest is history. He ended up going to jail for it and all that. But nobody but John Ferguson knew about the numbers and Eagleson. Once those numbers came out, nobody knew that I had the numbers. And when we had Boom Boom Jeffrey's funeral here in Atlanta, I was the ambassador to take John Beliveau out, for the dinner the night before the funeral, because he represented the Montreal Canadiens. And he put some champagne on the table, and he says, Danny, the boys in Montreal found out from John Ferguson's son that you were the numbers guy in that thing. Nobody knew who got the number to Carl Brewers, and Carl Brewers never told anybody. That was the deal. I says, yeah, that was the deal. So, and then Jean Beliveau asked him, why did you do it? I says, my dad told me, if you know something is wrong and you do nothing about it, you're more wrong than they are. You're a worse person than they are. And I says, I had to do the right thing. Mind you, I'll never get a vote for the Hall of Fame, even though I hit 625 in my career, but it's not important. I did the right thing.
That's an amazing and dramatic story. How much of this has come out, Dan? I mean,
it's not important. I told you that.
I understand.
Some people are going to hear it, they're going to hurt, but a lot of the guys only found out afterwards, like when Boom Boom got his check and all that. And, when John Beliveau told me, he says, when the boys from the Canadian brought the checks over, he says, he thought it was a joke. He says, for us, he says, Henry Richard and all that, he says, to get those, $420,000, $398,000 check, it was like winning the lottery. They were getting only about $9,000-$10,000 a year. He says, it was a windfall that they never thought. And he says, we couldn't believe it. We were grinning like, we looked like the cat that swallowed the canary, but the whole idea was, I says, was it fun to get the check to go and sign it? He says, yes. He says, the only thing that was not fun, he says, pay the tax on it.
Small price to pay, maybe.
It's better than nothing.
Right, you got it. Well, the good news is you're paying tax on something that you've inherited or
you found money.
Right. All right. So let me ask you. Let me wrap up with that question, then, and one last one, and because this has been very, very intriguing, and I appreciate your giving us all this time and this story. So, what in all of this, right? So you're obviously keeping a lot of this close to your vest. You're very savvy, I guess, in terms of trying to recognize your career path and architecture, but knowing deep inside what you ultimately kind of need to do and sort of bring to light. Mm-hmm. Were you able to determine what the original motivation or circumstances was of the NHL's, shenanigans when it came to this pension scenario? Like, why in the first place was all of this done?
Well,
was it?
It's just to show you that when there's a conflict of interest, because Mike Milbury at one time made a lot of noise about Alan Eagleson should not be the players' NHLPA president and represent some players and be an agent for some of the players because it was too much of a conflict. And also, Alan Eagleson, when he went to Florida, he went to the Bahamas, he was on somebody's yacht. He was on Sonny Warbling presidential suite in Florida. He was on the Wirtz yacht in Miami. He was, there was too many conflicts of interest. And I knew that they were stealing money because one year, I got something done. I had some teeth done, fixed. And I got $1,000 check for my teeth, and it was only $192 in 1980. That's when things were cheaper. And I sent the check back to the NHL, and they kept sending me the check back. And I says, hey, that belongs to the NHLPA, the Player Association. I said, that goes to the pension plan. I says, I'm not going to steal from my player. And Eaglesons and Sam Simpson told me, you stupid ass, you keep the money. Everybody does it. So when there's wrongdoing, why steal from the older player that was not getting it? That's what put the bug in my ear. I said, there's something wrong there. Then it revealed itself. So that's why I did it, really.
Well, justice has been served, no doubt. It also speaks to, a lot of the other issues that we've sort of talked about on this show, which is management versus labor, right? The realities of what the quote unquote business is, right? Even more acute now, right? How many times has the NHL had player stoppages and work stoppages? I mean, to the point of shutting down entire seasons. I mean, probably, it's probably the most dramatic over the last 20 years is the NHL, right? And probably again in a couple of years, right? Yeah. So that, I mean, in many respects, this is, doing the right thing is not always the.
And you remember the last shutdown lasted fairly long, and the guy that was in charge of it for the Player Association and NHLPA, well, he did a great job, because he was also making sure that there would be the right gratuity paid to all the players, even though the new players are making so much money. The guy that paid the stuff for them can get a little bonus every year. And he did that. So you see, there was a wrong, everybody looks at it, well, this shouldn't have been a strike, But some of the players that were playing, making all the money, says, well, a lot of the older guys don't get anything anymore. Because a lot of players, at one time, the NHLPA says you can take your pension, or the NHL pensions, you can take your pension. And that was mostly in Canada, and the guys could bring it to a broker, and they can do IRA. And then 3 years later, the Canadian government called back all the IRAs, and all the guys lost their money. Nobody talks about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's also a sign of, I guess, the times that we're talking about, right? Like the ABA, for example, right? Obviously, a league that sort of came and went after about 9 seasons or so, and we've had some interesting conversations with some of the old players there, where they're seeking restitution of some of, call it pension, call it, I don't know, war pay or whatever. But when the NBA absorbed the ABA, right, there is a implicit, or in some cases even legally explicit, understanding that there would be an accommodation of the players from the ABA that came along as part of it, that they would get, if not made whole, but certainly, benefits and or health insurance and those kinds of things. And they're still fighting that today, to this day. So. Oh,
yeah. And you know what? If those guys know, all they have to do is join the NFL alumni. I joined the NFL alumni, even though my team was defunct and all that. The fact that I paid into a pension plan, into a professional league that's still in the United States, I joined the NFL alumni, and I can get some of the benefits there. A lot of those guys are not instructed about that.
Well, so that's maybe that's sort of a way to sort of corral the rest of our conversation, because I think this is certainly an issue that even in today's modern NFL and pro sports, as the money has gotten even more obscene, and the values of franchises and the billionaires now in order to own a franchise or whatever, right? It's even gotten to a gargantuan level, right? This is even more important.
And look, gambling is going to be in less than 3 years going to be in 40 states, legalized gambling. How much money is that going to bring to the sports?
But it also calls out how players. And it seems to me that a number of leagues and certainly a number of professionals have recognized that education, right? You're a numbers, the numbers guy, right? So, but not everybody who's a star player in any sport, in college and in pros, are come from maybe backgrounds that aren't sort of financially savvy or finances of any sort, right? They're just not prepared for not only the today of what to do with that windfall and how to manage your money, but more importantly, what about tomorrow? Because the career ends at some point, right? It doesn't go on forever, right? It never does.
And the whole idea of it, you know what? Even though a lot of people, you imagine one day a guy was talking to me because I was with Patrick Roy, and Patrick Roy was telling me that one morning he gave $10 million to his wife and says, so long, Lenny, and he still had $35 million left. You get me? He bought out of his divorce. He bought his divorce and this and that. He was telling me that. And you look at that kind of money and, Guy Lafleur, myself, and all those guys, we never made $3 million. You see, in a career, and they wonder, well, what do you have today? And well, hey, I live like this. I can't complain, and that's the whole idea. But it's just the way, the time you come in is the time you come in. You got to do the best with what you got.
All right, let me ask this one last question, and this has been great, and I appreciate all of this, and I look forward to getting this out there for our audience. So let me give me a sense then from your perspective, right? And I think it's very unique, your perspective, given the time you were in the league, the teams that you were part of, as well as the bigger story that you were involved in, and frankly still are, arguably. What is the current state of the NHL? I mean, you're looking at a Seattle team coming in at $600 million as an expansion fee. You've got a number of cities that are still eager, perhaps, to take some of the Phoenixes or the Floridas if they're willing. Like I know the folks in Kansas City wouldn't mind. I know Quebec wouldn't mind. Nobody saw, I don't think, the success of Las Vegas so quickly. But what do you think of the NHL and its current and or future trajectory? Are you excited about it? Are you worried about it? Has it gotten too big, too fast? What do you think?
Well, look, the way they got the salary cap, what are they, $139 million now, something like that? The salary cap? What's the salary cap in the NHL?
Yeah, it sounds about right, but I don't have the specs in front of me.
Yeah, anyway, just something like that. If they have it, they have the TV rights, they must be making money, or they wouldn't stay in it. And you look at the Vegas team. The Vegas team came in the first year, and they proved one thing. If you have the best scouting, you know how to scout, you got a good coach, and you have, naturally they had good sport ethic. Repetition is, success is repetition. There's a lot of teams doing really, really well. Okay? And you look, I think the state of the NHL is, indirectly in Canada, the teams are all solid. In United States, I think there's about 16 that could collapse. If there would be a bad economic crisis, those teams would collapse tomorrow morning. In Canada, they would survive because of their TV rights and their structures and everything. But the Canadian teams are never going to keep their good players because of taxes. That will always be the same. The good players that makes a lot of money, they're always going to end up going south. And until that structure is taken care of, that hurdle is taken care of, well, I think, right now the economy, wow, our economy is fabulous. Look at the interest rates, 3.6% mortgage rate. I mean, when I started, it was 15% mortgage rate. So you look at that, and it's only as good as your economy. A league is only as good as economy.
I think you've actually stumbled onto something even so I tend to very much agree with you, right? We are cyclically overdue, right? Take politics out of it it's just economic cycles that we're overdue for some kind of, shall we say, course correction or just general pause, I guess, in a and we'll see how and when that shakes out and whatever. But I don't think you're off base at all. Not only with regard to the NHL, but just about every major sports league. Look at major soccer, for example, right?
Every major sport, because look, what happens if the Democrats come in and they want to go socialize? What's going to happen? The worst thing that happens in a socialized country is corruption. How can that destroy sports overnight? That's what, when I look at all those people making comments about socialism, tax this, tax that, you know what? That's going to, overnight, that could change everything. Because all of a sudden, when the governments tell you how you're going to live, even your pro athletes, a lot of stuff's going to go out the window.
Well, even if it's not policy, it's also just it's discretionary income, right? When people have less discretionary income, right? And look at the average ticket prices, look at the suites, look at the VIP, look at the subscription television.
Hey, look.
Lots of revenue streams, right?
What is the cost to go to an NHL game?
It's crazy.
When the Thrashers were here, they had the tickets $110. For on the one side of the building. Okay, $110, and the team that Atlanta put on the ice was fair to ordinary. Okay, and the whole idea, well, that's the way they say they can still make money because the building makes money. But what happens if the economy is bad? Okay, you look at the whole spectrum. You look at sports. You even look at the entertainer. Everybody's going to take a hit. That's people don't look at it, but the things that makes the table turn every day is your economy. And if it collapses, what happened in 1929 when it collapsed? What happened to sports? It's no different.
All right, my last question. Where's your book? When are you going to put a book out? When are you going to write stuff?
Oh, I'd never put a book out.
Really? It sounds like you've got some stories, and then some.
No, I got some of the best funny stories. What happened within the players, with traveling and all that. I got but that's I'm not that pretentious. Look, I had a great career. The Lord blessed me in many ways. I can't complain. I live great retirement. I can play golf every day. I enjoy my family, and I enjoy the life. I had a great life, but I was paid to play. So. And after my career, even though I had brain surgery and all, I work in rehab with all the concussion player and all that, and that's my fun part. I give back. But I'm not that pretentious. I think people that write books, I find that pretentious, especially if you're an athlete, because too many people, like I was a goalie, all those 5 guys in front of me always been part of my success and my joy of playing. So I don't think I'm better than they are. And I had many, I had about 7 people that asked me. I got 4 guys in Canada, 2 guys in the United States. I don't think I write a book. But my stories are very, very to me. And if some people listen to your show, a lot of them will never know. They'll never heard that before.
All right, our thanks to Dan. A very intriguing and revealing conversation, and one I was frankly not expecting, but I enjoyed it thoroughly. I learned a lot, and I suspect this will not be the last word on this story, the pensions issue, the Flames' relocation to Calgary, but frankly, just generally, our first exploration, and not only to the Flames, but also the Quebec Nordiques, and the first iteration of the Winnipeg Jets. I'm sure more stories to be had around all 3 of those teams. And we invite you to continue to listen. And obviously, if you've got memories or direct connections to some of those memories, by all means, reach out. And let's talk about it. Let's perhaps get those on future episodes, and we'll be more than happy to go deeper and luxuriate, frankly, in some of those into some of those memories and some of those stories. We certainly will enjoy hearing from you, and you can always send us an email just to say hello or let us know about what you're interested in, or perhaps a guest suggestion or 2 or whatever. Maybe you'd like to be on the show and you've got a good reason to do so. By all means, give us an email. Why not? At hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. Of course, that's how you can send an email to us directly, and you'll get to us. If you forget that address, you can just go over to our website, which is the convenient categorization of all things this show, and that's goodseatsstillavailable.com. That's where you're going to find all of our old episodes. You can download them, you can share them, you can do whatever you want with them. Lots of great imagery there. We've got a lot of commerce links to great shirts and media and books and all those kinds of things that we feature on this show. You'll find our social media links there, too. At Twitter, you'll find us at Good Seats Still. On Good Seats, but on Instagram, you'll find us at Good Seats Still Available. Yes, that's a little longer there on that site. And we also have a Facebook page devoted to us as well. You can follow us and chime in there if you wish there, too. Let's see, what else? Our thanks, of course, to the great Dr. Jerry Payne and all of his efforts putting our pieces together. And we want to especially tip our hat to Jerry this week, for it is he that got us connected to Dan Bouchard down in Atlanta. A good piece of evidence of if you've got an idea or a connection, we're more than happy to hear about it. And we thank Jerry this week for helping us do that. And it's been a while since we've been able to sort of get it on the air, but we have greatly appreciated his suggestion and getting this interview with the great Dan Bouchard to you, finally. All right, we're done for this week. Thanks so much for listening. I appreciate it to no end, and keep those proverbial cards and letters coming. Until next week, we'll see you.